Let me take you to a town called Ikare, where the dust of the red earth tells stories older than memory. Deborah, our protagonist, was born into the Julius family, her father a respected teacher, her mother a textile merchant famed at Ojude Market. Imagine growing up in a house where traders' songs mingled with the chalk-scented air of lesson notes. Yet, for all that prosperity, Deborah's grip on the world was always tenuous. You might be thinking, with such parents, how could she lack formal education? Here's the twist. Life isn't always linear. Deborah's schooling ended in primary 3. Instead, she became a house help, learning survival skills that no classroom could teach. Ever heard of informal education? Picture it as learning to read people instead of books, mastering the currency of trust instead of arithmetic. When folks saw Deborah, they saw confidence and competence. Only she knew that her diploma was written in invisible ink. You may ask, did that make her less? In many ways, it made her more. The streets, the markets, the whispered gossip of verandas, all became her classroom. She grew up with an awareness that was as streetwise as it was intuitive. Her journey planted the seeds of resilience, and as we'll soon see, she would need every ounce of it. August 15th, 2004, a date that rings in my ears like a bell of warning. Let me paint you a picture. A thief steals from the sacred, and superstition erupts into action. The Ajegunle elders, keepers of tradition and practitioners of ritual, gathered at the shrine, imagine 7 men in crimson robes, iron gongs in hand, invoking the god of iron. Technical term, communal invocation, a ritual act designed to distribute spiritual consequences. They called down a compound curse, a kind of spiritual chain reaction. Now, you might scoff and say, can words really kill? Well, in Ikare, belief is a force multiplier. The rituals were visceral, a beheaded dog, its blood poured over rusted iron and palm fronds, all to the accompaniment of a war song. Picture the elders singing, "When the flood of curses begins, it carries along all the involved and the obstacles." The very next day, tragedy struck a convoy returning from a wedding, a head-on collision that set vehicles ablaze. Among the dead, Mr. and Mrs. Julius. Deborah, by fate's strange mercy, was left at home and became an orphan overnight. This wasn't just a road accident. It was a communal trauma, a living parable of how a curse, like a virus, spreads consequences indiscriminately. Can you imagine the weight of silence that followed? The sense that destiny itself had spoken? Let's pause and ask, what happens to a young girl in Ikare when thunder takes her parents? For Deborah, the answer was heartbreak and improvisation. She had to drop out of school, her formal education, ending at primary 3. The technical term here is forced displacement. But for Deborah, it was simply called survival. She moved between households, each with its own rhythm and rules. Gone were the soft beds and warm meals of her childhood. Instead, she learned to read moods as one reads weather. She learned the power of silence, the cost of trust. You might wonder, did anyone help her? In Africa, extended families can be both nets and webs. Sometimes you're caught, sometimes you're entangled. Deborah became skilled at adapting what psychologists now call adaptive resilience. She did not let her orphanhood define her, but it left marks, an aversion to charity, a hunger for belonging. Let me tell you, every knock on the door felt like another test in the endless exam of life. And yet, from those ashes, she forged her own path, a story not just of survival, but of grit. Fast forward to Ajegunle, the man Deborah chose a name that means wealth has arrived, but whose pockets stayed empty. Picture him, 8 days in a police cell, skin etched with mosquito bites, his belt confiscated, dignity stripped away. Here's a critical concept: presumptive criminality, the idea that poverty itself is enough to make you a suspect. The DPO's interrogation was a dance of power, asking, accusing, dismissing while Ajegunle stood silent, his body language screaming what his mouth could not say. Now, you might be thinking, Why didn't he defend himself? But when the system is stacked against you, silence becomes your last shield. At the police counter, Ajegunle begged for the return of his money and wristwatch. The officer sneered, "Bring the receipt, or you're lying." This is institutional gaslighting, a tactic that turns victims into suspects, justice into a mirage. When Ajegunle finally walked out, he slipped through back streets, a shadow hoping to escape notice. Can you feel the exhaustion, the simmering anger? His ordeal is a microcosm of the wider struggle, where innocence is a currency few can afford. Let's bring it home. What does Deborah's journey and Ajegunle's ordeal teach us about inheritance? Not just of land or wealth, but of trauma, error, and unresolved curses. In African cosmology, there's a belief in ancestral inheritance, not just property, but problems. Each generation inherits not only fields and houses, but the ghosts of past misdeeds. The king's new decree, "Be mindful in invoking the gods," or "Seek orthodox solutions," is a plea for wisdom over impulse. Now, imagine yourself in Deborah's shoes. Would you shrink beneath the weight of inherited curses, or would you find new ways to break the chain? The scars of Ikare linger like the scent of dry Harmattan wind. But Deborah's resilience points to another way, learning from the past, refusing to perpetuate cycles of pain. If we're to heal, politically, spiritually, communally, we must be vigilant, self-aware, and, above all, compassionate. The story of Deborah and Ajegunle is unfinished. Just as every community must keep writing its own future, one mindful choice at a time.